So good afternoon and welcome to our Asian Student Experience panel. We want to get started right away and make sure that the amount of time that we have together is mostly spent with our students. So again, I want to start off with gratitude, and much like our prior student panel, I want to start with the same thing, which are two requests. There's two requests for us as audience members here to learn from our students. And as we bear witness to their testimony, I want to hone in on a national equity project disposition, which is that my experience is not up for debate. So the students will be giving their testimony, will be giving this account of their own experience, and we are here to listen with an open mind, open heart, open will, in hopes to create a better future for all students in a collective way. The second disposition that I would like to offer is from an American Indian scholar, Silko, and she says that our stories are not for entertainment. So our stories are for learning. We come from a long history of storytelling, and we've always learned from our stories and each other. So I invite you to lean into our humanity, lean into compassion, and to really hear our students as we want to create a better, more equitable future for every member of society. So when we say Asian student or Asia, that little word does not capture the vast complexity of this continent. So Asia is the largest continent of our globe. It is home to 60% of the world population, and it encompasses 48 countries. Even in San Diego, the complexity of Asian students are very much reflective of this data point as well. More people live inside of this continent than outside of it. That's the magnitude of it. So when we hear that word, we need to understand just the diversity that's enriching in that little word when we identify a student as Asian. And I want to introduce Felicia Singleton.
Thank you, Dr. Fabi. So the language diversity in Asia is so robust. There are over 2,300 languages across Asia. And when you think of Asia, some folks may be familiar with languages that immediately come to mind, like Mandarin Chinese or Japanese or Tagalog or Filipino. But there are a lot of other widely spoken languages in Asia that we may not be as familiar with, such as Farsi, Dari, Arabic, Pakistani, Indonesian, Hindi, or Bengali. Next slide. And just as Asia leads the world in diversity in languages, there's an equally tremendous amount of religious diversity in Asia as well. And here we have listed just some of the religious diversity that is present in Asia. And I'd like to now introduce Mr. Anthony Seha, who will take it from here.
Thank you, Felicia. And you see the names of our student panel and our moderators. I'm going to be just introducing our volunteer moderators. I want you to understand that all of these people as part of our panel have volunteered to serve their community in this way. And we're very, very grateful to them. And so our moderators are both university students from our local universities, Luan and Jamelin. And so Jamelin, we're going to start with you if you don't mind getting us started.
Hi, thank you for the introduction, and thank you to everyone who is joining us this afternoon. We will be opening up the discussion by introducing ourselves, how we identify ethnically, and who we dedicate the conversation to. So for example, my name is Jamelin. I identify as a Filipino American, and I dedicate this conversation to my grandfather because he's always been such a great mentor and even a friend. So Michelle, would you like to continue? Start us off?
Yes. Hi, my name is Michelle. I identify as Chinese American, and I'm dedicating this conversation to my mom. She's taught me strength, resilience, and grit.
Thank you. Joanna, would you like to share next?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Juliana. I identify as full Filipino American, and today I would like to thank my grandma who taught me to never stray away from my culture.
Thank you. Isaiah, who would you like to thank?
Hello, my name is Isaiah. I identify as Filipino and Korean, and I would like to dedicate this conversation to my parents and grandparents for all the sacrifices they made just for me to have a better life.
Awesome. Thank you. Paolo, who would you like to dedicate this conversation to?
Hi, my name is Paolo. I am half Korean and Colombian, and I would like to dedicate this conversation to my parents because they always give me endless opportunities.
Thank you. Neda, who would you like to thank?
Hi, I'm Neda. I identify as Iranian and Mexican, and I would like to thank my parents for giving me so much opportunity, all the opportunity that they didn't have growing up.
Thank you. Luan, would you like to share next?
Yeah, for sure. So hi everyone, my name is Luan. I identify as Vietnamese, and I am dedicating this conversation to all the instructor and future teacher because you guys will be the one being our future leaders. So for our next question, it will be, what is your experience with assumptions that are made by being Asian? So for me, I think one of the biggest assumption is that Asian are try hard academic. Now, there's two things that I want to explain. One is the question is like, what is wrong with try hard academic? You just want to learn and you just want to take it above and beyond. So there's nothing wrong with that. And to us Asians didn't study hard because studying hard is the only thing that we can do to make our hardworking parents be proud. That's the only thing we can give back to them. Juliana, what about your experience?
So many of the assumptions that I've experienced they've mainly happened in the classroom, and it's usually just like the small comments that people would make and would never think would hurt my feelings. An example would be like in the 7th grade, it was like we got our grades back from the first test, and I had like 7 or 8 different people come up to me to ask me what my score was. It's not like they were asking everybody, they had just asked me. And it was either to like prove that they were smarter than the Asian kid in class or to find someone to like set a goal as. And from that point on, I never really felt comfortable sharing my scores with anyone. They would always, people would ask like, oh, can I see your score? And I would reply, oh, no, thank you. Or I'd rather not today. And they'd always reply with, oh, it's that bad, huh? And I don't know, it was just always really frustrating because first they would assume that like I'd get the best grade, and then they would assume that I would just ask or do whatever they asked me to do. So yeah, just really frustrating.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I definitely relate to you a lot, especially in math class. Like after we take a test, after math is something else. Neda, how about you share your experience with us?
So because I'm Middle Eastern, people don't often think that we face the same struggles as the rest of the Asian community, but that's not true. All of the young people of our community, of the Middle Eastern community, know that the only way to become successful in the eyes of our parents is to be either a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer. And there's no such thing as a Middle Eastern family that doesn't expect their children to be top of their class in every subject. So.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I definitely read a lot too. Pablo, would you like to share with us?
Yes. I've experienced many assumptions in like a school environment. And those assumptions would be that everyone who is like Asian is naturally smarter and they are just naturally gifted. And so they don't have to try as hard and they sort of just excel in every subject. But for example, I didn't really excel that great in math in middle school, and a lot of peers would think that I wasn't truly Asian. And yeah.
Thank you for sharing. Isaiah, would you like to share with us?
Yeah. So as an Asian student, I feel like there's a lot of pressure to do well. I feel like because I'm Asian, it should be something that I'm good at already. And I feel like there's not really, failure really isn't an option for me. It starts at the peer level where I think they'll tease you if you mess up on a test when they'll say things like, oh, come on, I thought you were Asian, or you should be good at this. I also understand that whenever I do well on a test, I don't exactly feel like the satisfaction of doing well on it. I kind of just feel like relief that I didn't fail. and that's not exactly something that's that fun to feel. I also have a couple of Asian friends that they don't do well at school. They struggle a lot. And after talking with them, they told me that they feel a lot of pressure because they feel like they're always being compared to other Asian students, which is something that I also have felt in the past. And also that teachers, I feel like, don't ever really check up on me because maybe I'm doing well in school, which might have been a time that I could talk to them about my mental health or about things that are going on at home or outside of school, which students that need the most help should get the most help, which I'm glad that's the way it is, but it does create an imbalance to where I feel like I have to deal with everything on my own and I have to have everything together.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I definitely relate to you a lot with like, peer pressure and everything. How about Michelle? Would you like to share with us?
Of course. Similar to what my other panel members have expressed, I've had previous experiences like academic struggles in terms of, excelling at school or the expectations of being good at school. But I've also felt like peer experiences where it was automatically like assumed that I was like a sibling of another Asian student in the class just because we're both Asian. But it kind of goes back to the slides that we saw previously with the vast diversity of Asian people. And that's kind of some experiences that I felt.
Thank you for sharing. Chamberlain, would you like to share with us?
Yes, thank you. So I feel like mainly people assume that just because I'm Asian, I'm smart, quiet, or good at math. Can you hear me? And I feel like these labels can make it really difficult sometimes to take up space and feel comfortable while doing that. It also can be challenging to kind of like act authentically because people are like have these assumptions about me. So yeah. So now we'll move on to the third question, which is, what is your experience with being harmed by racism? In my experience, overt racism wasn't so apparent in high school as it was in middle and elementary school. A moment that sticks out to me the most actually took place in my 6th grade English class. A student came up to me and asked me if I spoke the Ching-Chong language. And that, like, now that I look back on it, it's coming from a place of immaturity. But even then, I feel like moments like those are always a bit jarring and hurtful because it's like the other person isn't seeing me as a whole human being. So now we'll shift the focus back to the student panelists. Juliana, would you like to share your story next?
Yeah, definitely. So most of my experience can really just be summed up in like small insensitive comments and microaggressions. And I remember, and this is a totally like stereotypical experience, but I remember in elementary school, when the lunch bell rang, everybody would like rush to the tables to get the best seats. Um, and in that peak of lunchtime, uh, everybody else around me was trading leftover pizza for the peanut butter jelly sandwiches that their moms and dads had packed. And I kind of just sat quietly eating my little thermos of kare and with like my little side of bagoong. And I don't know, I couldn't help but feel left out. Um, and just yeah, especially because I received so many weird stares and glances. But yeah, those were the shining moments of my elementary school experience.
Thank you, Joanna. I definitely relate to that. And I feel like it's even more difficult, like a situation like that is even more difficult to handle because like food is such a huge part of our culture, and to kind of be like isolated because of that is tough. So Michelle, what is your experience being harmed by racism?
I actually have a very similar experience to Jelena in terms of like socializing with food at like at elementary school at the lunch tables. I used to have like students that would make comments about the food I brought to school, like when I would sit down or maybe enjoy my fried rice and like dumplings that my mom packed for me. And obviously getting those whispers and stares and being um, like remarks of disdain and disgust affects me to today. I find it really hard to enjoy food of my culture in public when I'm with friends that aren't Asian or aren't my family. And that's kind of something that's always been bothering me. I've also had previous experiences with peers making like racist jokes in songs, um, where it's something along the lines of like Chinese, Japanese, da da da, look at these. And they would make very racist like expressions with their eyes, indicating like the stereotypical, like very small Asian eyes or things like that. And I've also experienced where someone assumes that just because I'm Asian, specifically Chinese, all of the products that I used came from China and had to be from China. And so those were some of the more public experiences I had in school. And I find that I didn't really get any support or any backup when these were made in front of adults or other authority members in my school.
Thank you for sharing your experience, Michelle. Netta, would you like to share next?
Yes. So like Juliana, it was often just a lot of insensitive and ignorant comments. And oftentimes once people realize, or once I tell people that I'm Middle Eastern, they really love to bring up terrorism. And everyone's entitled to their own opinions and views and assumptions, right? And I can respect those, but to straight up tell me, isn't everyone from there a terrorist? And it's just plain disrespectful, and you just don't say that to people. And this usually comes from fellow students, but I've never had a teacher kind of stand up in a situation like that and just tell the other people that they just crossed a line. So
thank you for sharing. How have you been affected by racism?
That was for Isaiah.
Sorry. So one thing that comes to mind is an example that was caused by the pandemic. So in the early weeks of quarantine, we saw in the news a lot of people being harmed around the nation because they were Asian. So I saw like children being cut and the elderly being like kicked in the face at bus stops, even religious buildings being vandalized. And so I run cross country and track year round. And so running is something that I have to do daily just to stay in shape. But at the beginning of quarantine, my parents had to really make a choice if they were going to allow me to run in my own neighborhood because they were afraid for my safety. And at the time, I didn't really agree with them. But now I realize that, well, I didn't agree with them because I thought it was crazy that I could be harmed just for being Asian, even when I didn't do anything. I also think back to a time in middle school in 7th grade at lunch. Me and my friends were teasing each other and joking around. And I remember one of my friends made a joke about how small my eyes were. And so, of course, I laughed it off, but it stuck with me throughout the day. And so when I got home, I remember running to the mirror and trying to figure out a way that I could smile so that my eyes wouldn't squint as much. And I remember realizing back then that I had a couple of Filipino friends that never really got made fun of for having Asian eyes. And I realized it was because their eyes were bigger than mine. And so I found a way that if I raised my eyebrows a little bit, my eyes would become bigger and it would look more like their eye shape. And I can look back in middle school, the photos, and I can see myself doing that a little bit. But even though I wasn't being like bullied physically, I realized now that it did a lot more damage than I originally thought, because that day I made a mental connection that me being Asian was something that was negative.
Thank you for sharing your experience and how, it's just that one small thing kind of like caused you to, try and constantly change who you are, like your facial expressions. Paolo, would you like to share your experience?
Yes. I experienced lots of racist comments and insults in middle school and lower school. And it would be classmates or friends just during class, and they'd make these, comments, and they really I brushed them off, but they really stuck with me. And just having teachers maybe hear it in the background and not say anything really made the classmates think that it's okay, which just made it more apparent over the like weeks and grades. They just say it more and they think it's, oh, like he can tolerate it. It's funny. He's Asian. It doesn't really affect him. But it really stuck with me. But thankfully, it doesn't happen that much anymore. And when it does, I do speak up and try to fix it.
Thank you. And I definitely agree that it's important that we kind of, oh, okay. I'm going to share my camera. Okay. Thank you for sharing, Paulo. Lastly, Luan, would you like to share your experience?
Yeah, definitely. So for my experience, like as I thought that if I go to a diverse school, a diverse school community, I wouldn't like face racism or like, discrimination and stuff like that. But I guess I was wrong because like people would often take advantage of me because of the assumption that I'm Asian. So I would know like every answer in the test. They would know like I really don't. Yeah, so they just like really keep going at me for like homework and stuff like that. And you know, the peer pressure really get to me. Like I have to comply because I don't want to get in trouble or like fight because I don't think that my parent would want to hear that when they go back to my house. So for our next question would be, what does it mean to you to be labeled as a model minority, and are you familiar with the term? So for me, I'm very familiar with the term, and I think it's like extremely wrong to have the label model minority, because in the first place, the label basically set up like a competition for all of the minority to compete to get to that label, so they can feel somewhat value into society. In addition, I think it's not fair for other minority group because in my theory, I think that each minority group have their advantage and disadvantage. So for instance, like when you go to job hiring, right? As you like the first thing that they notice, like the interviewer will notice like your race, ethnicity, and stuff like that, and they will have like a recollection of like part of you, like if you're Asian, like because I have experience with this. And if you're Asian, you like they would think that you work hard and stuff like that. I don't know about the other minority group, but I don't want to make assumption about it. But for Asian, we would have like a higher chance of getting hired. That's recollection of art and stuff like that. So I think the model minority label is like really long. So Neda, would you like to share with us?
Yes, so for me, being labeled as a model minority, it not only erases our struggles, but it also puts a lot of pressure on us, so much so that we often don't feel like, well, I at least often don't feel like I can ask for help especially when I really need it. Like if I'm struggling in school because we just went to distance learning, I did in fact struggle with school when we had just changed to distance learning, and I didn't feel like I could ask for help. And when the semester ended, I didn't have as good grades as I know that I could have had. So, and then, for example, my dad is always telling me that I have to do better than him because every generation is supposed to do better than the last. But I mean, my dad's an immigrant who went to university and is now a successful engineer. So, and he provides for us and has given me so much opportunity. And I just don't see how much better than that it can really get.
I definitely relate a lot with you because my parents also expect me to do a lot better than them because they don't want me to experience what they have been through. So yeah, would you like to share with us?
I think that was for Isaiah.
Yeah, sorry. So for me, being labeled as a model minority will always mean that my struggles are not that important to everyone else. I started to realize that whenever I called someone out for making a racist remark against another Asian person, everyone would just laugh it off or not take me seriously. You'd always hear like, well, it's about Asians being good at school, so what's the issue? Which took me a long time to process originally because it's true. I mean, predominantly the stereotypes towards Asian people are positive, if a stereotype can be positive. And so that was really hard for me. But only later on did I realize that what you tolerate you teach them how to treat you, which basically is like whenever you brush it off as not important or you laugh it off, the line between something being racist and being a joke is no longer there, which really sucks. Adding on to that, I also feel like I don't really fit in with other people of color, nor do I fit in with white people. I feel like I don't exactly fit in with other people of color because I might be doing better at school than them, or a lot of the time they'll just assume that my life is better than theirs. And when it comes to some white people, I most times feel like I'm just not taking seriously. There's a couple times where I've been passed up for something that I feel like I deserved, but it turns out that I wasn't even in consideration at all.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you a lot thank you a lot for sharing. Definitely, I relate to you a lot. Juliana, would you like to share with us?
Yeah. So for me, being labeled as a model minority is really, really terrible, actually. I know that there are plenty of things and stereotypes that come along with being labeled a model minority, but just to focus on one, there's a lot of pressure to go into like a wealthy field, like Nada's examples, law, science, medicine, engineering. Um, when it comes to peers, I guess I've always had that assumption, like the small comments, like, "Oh, so what medical school are you going to? What law school are you going to?" Um, but I guess a really, like, an outstanding experience was, 2 years ago. I had this project where I had to, like, play the part of a lawyer and prosecute Christopher Columbus, and, um, it was, like, a whole production, and my parents obviously recorded the whole thing, and the day after, they showed the video of me, um, um, in the courtroom, to my grandma, and I guess this experience goes to show that these, stereotypes are very internalized in the Asian American community, because I remember my grandma's reaction watching the video, and to this day, at least once a month, she reminds me how every night she prays that I become a nice, successful lawyer. Um, that's nice that she's praying for me, but I don't think I wanna become a lawyer. So the pressure that has been internalized, in me and my family, it's a lot, and it's very much part of the model minority myth.
Thank you for sharing. Pablo, would you like to share with us?
Yeah. So to me, being labeled as a model minority, it puts a lot of stress on me. Where like I have to live up to the title and the status of being a model minority and all of its stereotypes. And I also think it puts a lot of people, including me, on a like predetermined path that you have to graduate high school, you're expected to go to college, and you're expected to, like what Juliana and Netta said, go into these really big fields that you're expected to go into. And I just think it's sort of not a good mindset, because with all the pressure, it can really affect your mental health.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Michelle, would you like to share with us?
So being labeled as a model minority, I find has a lot of like different levels of toxicity. Much like my other student panel members have talked about, there's like a common trend of silent struggle, and it's really hard to either go and ask for help because there's like this trend of expectations of being a perfectionist or being, better than other people. And I find that with myself, it's really hard, again, to ask for help, and I find that sometimes. Uh, Kind of like within family, you're comparing yourself against others. I used to compare myself against my cousins. I have someone who works in Google, a cousin that is a successful lawyer who met Obama before he was president, and I have another that's a pretty successful businessman. And it makes me feel a little inferior when I compare myself against others, because under the model minority, you feel like you have to be either equal to their standards or better, of where their successes and things like that. and like it's just kind of hard to be unique in your own sense and have your own individualism and being able to express yourself other than your given expectations.
Yeah, definitely. I relate to you a lot with like the really high standard within the family. So I have to be that up there with them. Jasmine, would you like to share with us?
Yes, I would. So I feel like the term model minority is a lot to unpack. Like the student panelists have said before, it perpetuates unrealistic standards for Asian students. I also feel like sorry, can you hear me? Okay. I also feel like it assumes that like white is the standard, and it minimizes systematic racism because it wrongly assumes that racial inequalities can be solved by other minorities, like oh, if they just like worked harder or were more obedient. I think that's just like wrong. So to be labeled as a model minority means to be labeled as something that I'm not, and I just don't think that it's like a real thing. So yeah. Our next question is, what or who has been the most helpful for you in becoming an empowered young person? So for me, literally just like encouragement and support from my teachers. That's been really helpful. And also teachers kind of giving me opportunities to showcase my leadership and kind of like prove to myself that I can like make change within my community. That's been really empowering. So now we'll return to the student panelists. Paolo, who or what has helped you become more empowered?
So for me, my school's community and teachers have had a huge impact on making me feel more comfortable with who I am and acknowledging and celebrating my cultural differences and ethnicity. Just the way they support everyone, and they're open-minded to every student's difficulties and issues. They're more than just a teacher. They're there to guide you, and it really helps.
Thank you. Michelle, who or what has empowered you?
So I found empowerment outside of a school setting. I got involved to a program called FNL, which is Friday Night Live, and actually they operate together with SDCOE. And there I've been with them for 4 years, and I met a head coordinator named Linda Lee, and she has helped me a lot in terms of like coming to term with self-worth and being proud of what I do, and like the actions that I've done, and has pushed me to want to empower others. And I find that support has become like my second family, and like it's so much positivity and so much love that it makes it like you just feel normal. Like you're able to be a kid. You're able to also be a leader. You're able to inspire other people and inspire yourself in the process. And that is something that has stuck with me and will continue to stick with me.
Thank you, Michelle. I love that answer, especially as a fellow Friday Night Live member. So, Joanna, would you like to share next?
Yeah. So for me, it's been all of my teachers and pretty much everyone at school. The school I go to, I'm very lucky. They empower me every day, especially right now by like reminding me about my rights and the importance of voting once I turn 18. But the teachers and staff at my school make sure that we're all represented and we feel comfortable every day. So, for example, in my sophomore year, we were learning about the United Farm Workers Movement, and when you learn about this, you learn about these amazing Latinx Americans like Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta. But for me, there was this one moment where we took some time to learn about the Filipino Americans that began that movement, like Larry Itliong and Philip Vera Cruz. And for me, I was able to see someone, I was able to, in a classroom setting, learn about Asian American history. And it was really amazing.
Definitely. I definitely do that, like having some representation is empowering. Isaiah, would you like to share who or what has empowered you?
Yeah, so for me, my sophomore humanities teacher played a big role in me being here today. All my life, school came pretty easy to me, and so I was able to skate by pretty much doing the bare minimum, which also meant that I felt like a lot of my teachers never really challenged me, and they never pushed me, and they also didn't give me any opportunities to go the extra mile. But in my sophomore year, my humanities teacher actually sat down with me, and she talked to me about my goals outside of high school. She asked me about what kind of person do I want to be and how did I plan on getting there. And that was like really cool to me that she actually cared that much about me succeeding. And she also played a big role in all of us starting an Asian club at our school, which not only helps us empower each other, but it was also a big deal to me because I was able to start embracing my culture and being proud that I was Asian. I also want to mention my parents. Basically, they were raised to keep their head down and be silent. Their parents believed that if they could just blend in with the crowd and be compliant, then they could go to college and they could get a good job, which is true, they did. But that also meant that they dealt with a lot of racism and they never really did anything about it. And so both of them worked really hard with me and my two sisters to help us understand that we need to stand up for ourselves and teaching us ways and telling us that we shouldn't just stand by when we see something that's unjust.
Thank you for sharing. Nadal, would you like to share next?
Yes.
Nadal?
So for me, probably, I just want to reiterate everything that my fellow panelists said because it's true, having a school that empowers you to vote and teaches you about your own culture and you and your classmates, your own culture and the history of where you're from it's very empowering. And also just having teachers really listen, like my sophomore humanities teacher, we started a club with her and I just felt like it was the first time I really felt like a teacher had really listened to my concerns and my ideas. And it was very empowering. And it also just things like this panel right now, it's nice to have people who will listen to your experiences and go from there and try to improve upon other people's experiences. So for me, it's having teachers who really listen and who want to build a relationship with you. And yeah.
Thank you for sharing. I definitely feel like having like an adult sort of give you some food for thought, like kind of motivate you, inspire you to make change is definitely something that's pretty cool. So lastly, one, who or what has empowered you?
So for me, I think definitely my family, because they have been like keeping up with all the Vietnamese culture and stuff like that, so that like I can keep remembering them and stuff like that without like losing them while I'm here in the US trying to find a new American identity. And in addition, I think also Instagram is also like a really powerful tool. It teaches me a lot of stuff and update me on a lot of stuff like in the current world in society that school don't teach. And I think it definitely encouraged me to become an advocate for other minority groups. So moving on to our final question. So what might you need or want from the adult around your school? So for me, I think that what I want is the adult around me at school is definitely keep an open mind, because we are now living in the age of revolution. I'm not talking about like technology revolution or agriculture revolution. I'm talking about the revolution of values, because our current generation, we're not staying silent anymore. We are speaking up, we're standing up for what is right and what is wrong, and we're fighting is what's made. So I want like all the instructor, all the teacher and stuff like that at school to be open mind about about the culture, tradition, and stuff like that. Because we want to create a more diverse community so that people would be feel comfortable in while walking down the street. So Neda, would you like to share with us?
Yes, so what I want from the adults around me is I want them to listen, which I already said, but it's important, right? And I also want to see my culture and my history represented in the curriculum, because it's important for not only for me to know my history, but for others as well. And and also to see other people who look like you and who have the same culture successful, right? To have teachers who look like you and are successful, and to see them being successful, it's important for young people to be able to see that, not only to be empowered, but it's, well, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Having able to listen to you is definitely like a really good thing. Jolena, would you like to share with us?
Is that me? Okay, sorry. So for me, I would like to, sorry, like I previously spoke about having that experience where I saw Asian Americans in the classroom on that screen and like learning about them was so great. And I feel like it would be so empowering and so amazing if that happened in every classroom. Not, of course, with just Asian American history, but with the history of all different cultures. And I know that's a lot, but I feel like right now is a great experience for me to tell a group of educators what I feel like is needed in classrooms here. So.
Thank you for sharing. Pablo, would you like to share with us?
Yeah. I think what I need most from adults right now is, I guess, teachers or just adults who support, are open-minded and are flexible, because right now many students without the right like adequate support can be left behind, and it can pretty much be almost irreversible, because when the upcoming years come and they haven't done anything or they haven't been catching up with work or certain things, it can really take a big toll on you. So I just think support is a huge thing right now.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for sharing. Isaiah, would you like to share with us?
Yeah, thank you. I need my teachers to help Asian students develop their leadership skills as early on as they possibly can. There's a lack of representation in management and executive positions almost everywhere. And so how are we supposed to dream of succeeding and doing things that we don't even see people that look like us doing? Asians are one of the most least likely racial groups to be promoted to those higher levels, which doesn't exactly make sense when you think that like the whole model minority myth is built around Asians being like hard workers, being reliable and accountable. And so why is there an invisible barrier that's stopping us from being promoted higher or leading people?
Yeah, definitely. Michelle, would you like to share with us?
Much like what Isaiah said, and kind of like Jelena said about seeing like similar racial mentors or like teachers is really important, because for me, when I mentioned how I got empowered, Linda she's a Korean Thai American, and that was a lot in terms of being empowered, because she was a big role model for me, because she was also an Asian American who was able to empower other people. And I also think the biggest thing is like when I was younger, when I think about it now, I wish that educators were there for me and like making sure that my experiences, like my racist experiences, didn't exist, and making sure that nobody crosses the line of making us feel inferior about our own culture and heritage. And that's like one of the biggest things, along with my other fellow student panelists have said, like support is also a really big thing that we all need.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Evelyn, would you like to share with us?
Yes. So I agree with all of the student panelists. Just support from teachers. For me, having teachers kind of just check in, like ask how I am, is like a huge help. I remember stopping by a teacher's classroom one day just to ask a quick question, and I guess she noticed that I was like, I seemed a bit frantic or busy, and so she asked how I was, and I gave the usual response like, "Oh, I'm good, I'm fine." But then she asked again with like a genuine curiosity, and gave me an opportunity to really express what I was going through at that moment. And I feel like that was a really healing experience for me, because oftentimes I feel like I'm expected to like not reach out. So yeah.
So I know that that concludes our questions here and this afternoon. And I want to say thank you to the students for sharing their stories and sharing their time, the equity team and student services team for the time to prepare, to recruit, and to really hold the space for students to tell their stories. And I also want to speak to the audience right now and let you know that we actually had other students that were going to join us. And they had to refrain from coming because their business, their home, their business had been hit by hate crimes 8 times since March. So this is very real. And this is, and I just stand in awe and thank you for sharing all of your stories. And I think that my hope as an educator and my hope as a parent and my hope as just a human being that shares San Diego County with you is that we all stood in awe today, learning from you, learning from your voice, and honoring what you had to say in order to act tomorrow. So thank you so much for making sure that we understand this silent struggle, these invisible barriers that exist, and the ways that adults in the education system contribute to those. So thank you. Thank you so much, team. Thank you, audience, and thank you, students and panelists and MCs.